Meu nome é Bruna, eu sou repórter do Intercept Brasil e hoje eu vou conversar com a Silvia Federici, que é uma historiadora italiana. Ela escreve sobre caças bruxas e sobre a autonomia das mulheres sobre o próprio corpo. E aí então a gente vai conversar um pouco sobre aborto, sobre direitos reprodutivos, sobre maternidade, enfim, espero que vocês gostem. So abortion has not always been treated as something immoral or criminal, right? When and why did that change?
Yeah, I found, doing some research about the position of the church in the Middle Ages towards abortion, that in fact in the books they were called the penitentials. These were books of instructions for, the priest, the confessors, and the position of the church towards abortion was not completely negative. In fact, they recommended that if a woman was a poor woman, then she could say a few prayers in case she had aborted. But you really see a tremendous change, in the 16th century, 15th, 16th century already. Partially I've explained it as a response to the Black Death. It was this epidemics of plague, that decimated a large sector of the European population. So the concern with population, demography, becomes much heightened. At the same time, you really begin to see a war against abortion in the 16th century, when not only the church, but practically all the government, the states, in hand to hand, with the beginning of a capitalist economy, you begin to see the introduction of legislation that are very punitive towards abortion, towards infanticide. They prescribe the death penalty, and this goes together with the witch hunts and the issue of control over the women's body and the demonization of any forms of contraceptive action. It really goes hand in hand with the introduction of this legislation. The witch is the woman who hates the new life. She kills children. She makes conception impossible. She freezes men, practically castrates men, makes conception impossible. So the argument that I have made in Caliban and the Witch is that with capitalism, there's a whole new demographic consciousness that develops. Capitalism is a social system that, unlike the previous one, sees the accumulation of wealth as the product of human labor, not of the possession of land. Land is important, but far more important is how many people, is really the labor of people that creates the wealth. Okay. And so that changes the attitude towards procreation. Procreation acquires an economic value. And so with procreation is the control over the body of women and the control also over women's sexuality.
All right. We usually see the Middle Ages as a terrible time for women, but when it comes to their reproduction rights, as you just said, I got the sense from your books that they had significant autonomy. I think you already spoke a little about that, but if you want to elaborate.
Sure. Well, first of all, the question of women in the Middle Ages. People were exploited, people were subjected. In many cases, for a long time, they couldn't leave the lands of the landlords, right? At the same time, work was very collective. And, you don't have in the Middle Ages a wage system. The way the serfs are paid, remunerated, right, are their given land that they would cultivate collectively. So the whole culture, the whole reproduction and everyday life in the Middle Ages is one that brought people together. And certainly women work together all the time, you know, in terms of sewing, in terms of working in the fields, and with procreation. I mean, all the images that we have of women into the 15th century, it's even in the 16th, still, it's women who are taking care of the one who is giving birth, right? Evidence of contraception dates back 3,000 years before Christ.
Wow.
And you know, also women enslaved, women who came to Brazil, to other parts of the American continent. They brought with them a knowledge of herbs and many times used them. So women were the healers. They were the midwives. Not until the 16th century, you know, you have men entering the place where women give birth. Yeah. And they never gave birth alone. They always gave birth surrounded by other women, okay. Right? So that's something very, very important to keep in mind. Yeah. And I think that now, for instance, you know, some black women in the United States are trying to bring back something of that control. For example, with the character of the doula. Yeah. Women don't go alone. You know, try not to go alone to the hospital where they are humiliated, they are forced to have a cesarean birth, and they have somebody, an advocate, who is there for you in a moment that is difficult, and to allow you to concentrate on what you're doing.
You say that childbirth used to be controlled by women, but at some point the power over our reproductive health, our pregnancies, and the moment of childbirth were hijacked by medical professionals who at the time were men mostly. Right. And midwives started being burned for witchcraft. And why were we never able to grab back this control, and how can we fight this?
Yeah, this is, it's true. I mean, there is a very interesting pamphlet, you know, by Barbara Ehrenreich and Deidre English that was published in 1971. It's called Witches, Midwives, and Healer. This was one of the pamphlets that inspired me to write the, you know, Caliban and the Witch. And that one documents, you know, the changes that arise in the medical profession, you know, brought to the whole organization of, you know, delivery, and how more and more the midwives were misplaced, and because they were suspected of helping women, you know, to carry on infanticide or some form of contraception, you know. So there's really, you can really date it. You see that it was a political move. It was not something dictated by desire to protect women. Midwives knew much, much, much more than the doctors. And the displacement of the midwife was a long process. Even in the 19th century, I discovered that there was struggle, for example, in Canada, to resist, you know, the banning of the midwives. I think that what is happening in Brazil now, it's really a continuation of what is happening in the United States. We have exactly the same product, except in the United States now we have a constitutional law which says that abortion is legal, Roe and Wade. But since it was passed, there's been a tremendous effort by right-wing politicians and by the churches, all churches, to change that. Yeah. And several states have already passed laws that are limiting, they are restricting the right to abortion. And the right to life people are now, you know, making the life of women who go to a clinic impossible. They go outside and they scream, you know, baby killer, baby killer. This is a witch hunt. Yeah. This is a real witch hunt. And it's totally hypocritical. We have to denounce it. It is totally hypocritical. When they present it as a defense of life. But when the child is born, they do not help the child and they do not help the woman in any possible way. So it's an attack on the woman. It's not a defense of life, we have to say. They don't give them $1, $1 for their well-being. And now, in the States, they are giving rights, legal rights, to the fetuses. And women can be arrested for anything. Anything that in the mind of the politicians and the government, can affect the fetus. You are in a car accident, and then you were pregnant, then you can be accused of manslaughter.
That's crazy.
You are taking medicine for your health, but they may have some effect on the fetus, then again you can be arrested. And it's becoming more difficult to prove that you had a natural miscarriage, Yeah. And so, again, I think that it's very important that we denounce the hypocrisy, that the reason they are giving, that they are the defense of life. No, they are not the defense of life. They are the ones who are, in fact, placing legislation that makes it difficult for poor people to reproduce themselves. They want women to be producers of children, but they also want to decide who has the right to reproduce and who does not have the right to reproduce. So they want white women, middle-class women, rich women to have more children, but they don't want the poor to have more children because they are afraid, that they are going to reproduce troublemakers. Capitalism has had to also control women's sexuality and to make sure that sexuality, we never experience that sexuality for our pleasure, for our satisfaction, for our well-being. But, the sexuality too will become part of the work process. So sex, yes, but to produce children. Sex, yes, but to give pleasure to men, and give them satisfaction, because this is part of pacifying men. Men are exploited, but then they have a servant. They can go back home, the food is ready, and she's there to have sex. So for women, sex has been part of housework. Sex has become work.
I would like to bring a very strong phrase that is in one of your books, that is, every abortion is a work accident. Can you comment that?
Yeah, abortion is a work accident precisely because of that. Because for us, sex is work. For us, sex, it's a job of pleasing men. It's part of the reproduction of the worker. You reproduce a worker not only by feeding, washing clothes, but also providing sex, emotional support, housework, domestic work, reproductive work, as many, many activities. It's been made invisible, it's been devalued, but actually has so many tasks. It's a very complex work, and sex is central to that, right? So women have not only to make sex whether they're tired or not at night, but they also have to please the man, pretend that it gives you pleasure, even if it is a very fast job, in and out. And so, the question of not using condoms is part of their duty. So women become infected, for example, with AIDS, because many men have not wanted, because it interferes with their pleasure. So whether it may kill you or not doesn't matter, but it interferes with their pleasure. And I think that's part of the struggle of recuperating some control over our sexuality. Say, no, I'm not going to risk to die. I'm not going to risk to become pregnant and then work for 20 years, raising a child, and become totally impoverished because I don't have the money to support the child, just to be able to have intercourse when men do not run this risk. Yeah. This kind of inequality, it's absolutely unacceptable. And it's only a masculine hierarchy that can impose that. And they want to decide why they themselves don't go through 9 months of pregnancies. So what kind of rights do they have?
With a strict correlation of sex and procreation, many different expressions of sexuality that cannot lead to reproduction they started to be seen as obscene and banned as crimes.
Sure.
And that includes homosexuality. And it really shocked me to read that homosexuals' bodies were used to light the fires where the witches were burned.
For example, there's a broad documentation that in the Middle Ages in some Italian town, for example in Florence, homosexuality was widely practiced at all levels. And it's only later that it becomes a crime. The laws are introduced that are banning, and they're also introducing, and a whole ideology is created, right? A whole ideology. So sodomy, the crime of sodomy becomes a capital crime. And then with the witch hunt, sex with a person of the same sex. It's part of the, demonology. It's part of the charge of witchcraft.
Speaking of the devil, in Caliban and the Witch, you mentioned that diabolical beliefs can rise when one production system is substituted with another. The president himself got elected with the slogan, "Brazil above all and God above everyone." And he has spoken out many times against what he calls gender ideology as something diabolical. And your book is about witch hunts, so I can't help but remember the image of a Judith Butler doll that was burned 2 years ago here in Brazil.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
Really perverse. That's perversion.
How does all of this religious demonizing of certain people and certain ideas relate to the current changes in the capitalist system?
Oh, it relates very, very well. I mean, first of all, I want to say something about the changes in the mode of production. Right? The changes of the mode of production are not limited to economic changes narrowly understood. Okay. Right? They change every aspect of life, reproduction, social relation, etc. No? I think that today, the new witch hunt and the kind of propaganda the right-wing politicians, are organizing, and their new use of religion, right? Religion as a way of disciplining women. It's really a response, first of all, to the struggle that women have made, right, against social subordination, against, providing all this unpaid labor. People ask me, but what about the church? What about religion? And I've been saying over and over and over, the church and religion is part of the power structure. It has been part of the power structure always. And it's that part of the power structure that in particular has been particularly directed to organizing reproductive life. The whole demonization of women's bodies. You are Eve. The women bring the original sin. Women, they are bringing the original sin, being the cause of the fall from grace of humanity. This is really something. This is really something. So the church from the Middle Ages to the present, and the appeal to God and religion has been very much used. We find that in front of the most severe attack on women's and communities' ability to have access to land, to reproduce themselves, one response has been to create what I call reproductive commons. Reproductive commons, cooperative ways of reproduction. And here I want to mention specifically, something I heard women from the MST saying already in 2000, at a conference on women in Mexico, and they said that when they were doing the land occupation, right, it was very necessary to be always together. So they always did the reproductive work together. Then once they had the land, often the man would say, oh, I want to put my farm here, I want to put my farm there. And the women said, no, 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 no. When we needed, it was powerful to do everything together. It was necessary in the struggle. We have to continue to do that. We have to continue to reproduce, do the housework, take care of the kids, cook together as we did during the struggle. What is happening in response to dispossession is not only resistance, but is also a transformation of everyday's life. There's something new that is being created.